Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us again today for Safe Money Radio. This might be the first time you've ever logged in. You may be listening in the car. Just know this, there's also a podcast. There's also a YouTube channel. You can actually watch today's episode because we are super excited to have a guest on the show with us today, Joseph Jordan. He's just an incredible person. He's been in this industry for so long, and we were recently at a conference together in Dallas. I spoke on Tuesday night. He spoke on Wednesday morning, and I got to sit on the front row and listen and take great notes when he spoke. So, Joe, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And for those of you who are actually watching online, he is the author of Living a Life of Significance. And so we're going to give you the information of how you can get a copy of this later today by going to Joe's website. And you absolutely want to read this book. Such a blessing. So, Joe, I tell you what, as we get started, and I always say this, this year I've already had Tom Hegna on. I've already had David McKnight on. And ironically, we both talked about them in our talks and didn't know each other was going to talk about them in our talks. Cheryl Moore is a great friend. I know you talked about her. Her books are here behind me. She was just on here recently. So tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do in the world of financial planning.
Sure. I've been in the business 50 years now. So I started as a life insurance agent. I ran insurance sales at Payne Weber, for those who are too young to know what that was. It was a wirehouse on Wall Street. It was a stock brokerage firm. It was a smaller Merrill Lynch, but it was still pretty substantial and a well-known name. And then I went to MetLife, and I built their annuity business, had all retail product development, and started their fee-based financial planning unit. And then since 2012, I've been an author and a lecturer. So that's kind of what I've been doing. And so I will tell you, I've seen a lot of change. When I started in the business, everybody stayed in their lanes. They sold a product, or variation thereof, but not much more. And then it evolved towards planning, which was a good idea. But it's a very left brain and analytical approach. And I'm going to discuss later, I think, where the business is going to be going. I would also tell you that experiencing change, I found that there's three big drivers of change. And one of them is regulation. And you just have to deal with it. I mean, I hope it doesn't get too crazy and, what have you. The second one is technology, and that's a really big one. And right now, the whole planet is concerned that their business is going to be, or their job is going to be taken by AI. I can't talk about the planet, but I can talk about financial advisors, and they will not be replaced by AI. Financial advisors who use AI will replace the ones who don't, because they're going to be able to operate a lot more efficiently. And then the third one, and the big one, is demographics. And again, when I started, everybody stayed in their lane. Then everybody started selling everybody else's stuff. So I was able to get in on that. I had to get stockbrokers at Payne Weber to do insurance, very hard in the 80s. And then I had to get insurance people to do investments, which was less hard. So that was the beginning, I think. And I think it's being driven by customer demand, that people don't want to just talk to one person about one thing in their life. They want a total plan type of approach. And I'll discuss a little bit later where I think the business is going, because I've seen it, and I think I'd like to share it.
Fantastic. Well, friends, if you're listening right now or if you're watching online, you have a real treat. This is someone who's an expert in this industry for more than 50 years. And I want to say this to add on to what you're saying about the changes, Joe. There's so many changes. But this last week, I had a full schedule. Every day I was back to back to back with clients. And one day I was meeting with clients, and I heard a bunch of noise out in our waiting room. And there was laughing and talking and stuff going on. And I thought, well, we don't have a person booked while I'm in here with someone. What's going on? And when the meeting was over and my clients left, I went out there and I said, who was in here? Who was in the waiting room? And they said, oh, that was one of our clients. They gave us a name. They said, he just dropped by to get some coffee and to talk with us. And I said, well, what was it he was wanting to share? And he said, you'll find it funny. He wanted to say how he heard you 15 years ago, and you were talking about these things called fixed indexed annuities when no one else would talk about them, and everyone thought it was a bad word, a four-letter word, but you were talking about annuities, and you were the only guy on the radio. And he said, and now there's 5 guys on the radio, and guess what? They're all talking about annuities, just like Brad was 15 years ago. And then he said, but then he didn't stop there. He said, and then you started talking to everyone about taxes, and you started having this Ed Slott guy on, and you joined his group and started talking about tax planning. He said, guess what? Now all these people are talking about tax planning on their shows with annuities. And he said, and then I noticed you started talking about estate planning a couple of years ago, and guess what? Now all these guys have hired attorneys to come in and stay one day in their office, and they all talk about how important an estate plan is. And he goes, I just wanted to come by and say, I know you did it all first. And as soon as you come up with something new, they're going to copy you and start doing the same thing. And I found that so funny. And I know there's truth in it. We are the longest running show by about 10 years in this area. And that happens. But you know what? Guess what? I got the idea from someone else. That's how I ended up on the radio. I didn't create it. And so I was with people like Tom Hegna and Ed Slott and other people years ago who said, you've got to get your message out there in a different way. And I certainly wouldn't have ever believed there would be a day where I'd be on YouTube or on podcasts or I'd be using AI or anything like this. So it does constantly evolve and change. And so if you're joining us today, you have just such a special treat. We're going to share some incredible life-changing stuff with you regarding retirement planning. So stay with us. You can call us anytime at 866-780-SAFE. That's 866-780-7233. And there's always someone standing by to take your call. Joe, you mentioned something before the break. You talked about demographics as it relates to retirement planning. Let's start there. What are you talking about when you talk about demographics?
The demographics is a huge deal. I mean, right now, if you have a couple age 62 that doesn't smoke, there's a 50% probability one of them's alive at age 92. Now, we have never dealt with that before. And so that's the fundamental change in terms of taking a look at what retirement is, the way people experienced it before. And a lot of people put ideas in their head about their parents and grandparents well, it's irrelevant now because people are living a heck of a lot longer. And so it's really changing the ideas. And everybody thinks retirement will be one big blast, cigars and golf all day. Well, the fact of the matter, it's not. And I came across another book by a guy named Gary Sirak, S-I-R-A-K. And the book is titled How to Retire and Not Die. And that opened it up to me. He's an advisor. What he began to notice was that some of his clients, even those that were very well off, didn't handle retirement very well. And they became isolated and it was problematic. And what I think is happening now as we look at retirement, people lose things in retirement, all right? They lose routine, they lose identity, they lose relationships, they lose purpose, they lose power. And people need meaning and purpose when they're in retirement. And so that's one of the things that I began to look at where I think the financial services business started selling product. Then it went into the idea of planning, but very left brain, analytical and numbers thing. It doesn't really connect. But the idea, and that was the preeminent thing, the money. What is it you want to do? And have you ever taken time out to explore what is it you like and what do you don't want to do and how are you going to formulate your life? And the money's supposed to support that, not the other way around. So that's the major issue where I think that's there. So my book was written for advisors, but Gary Sirak's is for civilians, lack another word. So I would urge everybody to get a copy of that book because it begins to get you thinking in that tone. And that's the big fundamental change that I see has happened.
Well, I'll say this. Back in 2018, I wrote an article for USA Today that talked about this. And I was talking about making sure you retire from something to something, because if you don't retire to something, you're going to lose your sense of significance. You're going to lose your sense of purpose. And I just tell everyone, what are your plans for retirement? And I'll tell them, if you don't have any plans after you retire, if there's not something of major significance, you'll be dead in a year. I watch it happen again and again and again. Someone works and has this massive career. They retire at 65 and they're dead at 67, 66 because there's no reason to get up in the morning. So we talk a lot about it. Now I hear that phrase being used all the time now. Like I said, that was published back in 2018, but I do talk about making sure you get up with purpose every single day. And so let's do this. You mentioned something in your talk when we were in Dallas a couple of weeks ago. I know you popped it up as a question, and I knew everyone was going to get wrong. I already knew the answer. I think you asked which nation has more people turning age 100 than any other nation, or who the oldest country is. So, and it's, of course, who is it, Joe?
It's the United States, and most people think it's Japan, but theirs is more per capita.
Yes.
The big issue that the planet faces now is the fact, and this came out in the Wall Street Journal, okay, there's not enough babies. Everybody's concerned about global warming, which is an issue. But the fact of the matter is the UN had predicted that the population would top out at 11 billion by the end of the century. Now it's 9 billion by 2060, and that's going to continue. China's going to get old before it gets rich. They have 30 million bachelors. Why? What do you think happened to the girls when they had this one-child policy? So that's really a big issue that they're facing right now. So they're going to go from 1.6 billion to a half a billion by the end of the century. So what happens economically when you have a smaller working age population and a massive retirement age population? You got a real big problem. And that's the thing that the planet faces. And so what I think is it's a great boon to people who are advisors, because the demand is going to be through the roof. It's what Nick Murray says. It's yo-yo. You're on your own. So all of the government programs are all going to be, why? Because the demographic shift. People thought there were too many people when it was absolutely the reverse. And it's irreversible. So that's some of the stuff that we have to deal with right now.
It's so good. You think about just Social Security and the cliff, if you will, of what's going to happen there. Last year, 2024 was peak 65. You had 12,000 people a day turning age 65. This year, it's around 11,000. That's going to continue for several more years. But you already mentioned it. What happens to the people who are what I call dinks, double income, no kids, right? They're not having children. So you have all these dinks running around. They're not having babies, and there's no one contributing to the economy. There's no one paying into Social Security. You have 11,000 people a day triggering their Social Security payments and retiring, and then no one coming in on the backside to replace that with funds. It's going to be a massive problem in the future if things don't change.
There is one thing I do want to bring up with this thing, too, is the fact that for every guy in the United States, the most people over 100, there's 5.5 women. And 80% of men die married and 80% of women die single. So this is a real women's issue, too. And that's why I'm really urging to get a lot more women into this business, into the advisory business, to help women, because they're the ones that are most subjected to the risks associated with this longevity risk.
That's so good, Joe. Will you share those facts just again? I want to make sure people heard that, especially if they're on the radio and they don't have the opportunity to rewind this.
For every guy, and again, we've just established that the United States has the largest population of 100 plus, okay? For every guy that's 100, there's 5.5 women that are over 100. The other thing is that 80% of men die married, but 80% of women die single. So that's a big issue.
I heard Ed Slott say this at one of our conferences a couple of years ago, so I know the stats maybe changed just a little bit, but he said men die first. This is the fact. Men are going to die first. And here's the thing. The average spouse lives 14.2 years after the death of the first spouse. So what do we have? You've already mentioned it. A whole bunch of women, 5-1, are outliving men. And, of course, their partner is going to pass first, and then they're going to live another 14 years. So do you have a financial plan in place for when you lose one of the two Social Security payments, whenever you are going to live another 14, 15, 20 years? My father passed 2 years ago. My mother looks like a teenager. She's 78 years old. She will live for 20 more years. I know she will. I had an aunt die at 103. My mother is in excellent health. Is there a plan in place for her to live 20 more years? And so that's one of the things we focused on. And, my dad was a Merrill Lynch guy. He hated annuities. And then 01 and 08 happened to my dad. I tell a story in the book. And guess what? 2011, Dad purchased 3 annuities, and my mother is still living off those annuities. Thank God my father saw the light in his later days. Friends, if you're just joining us today, author of Living a Life of Significance, Joseph Jordan, is joining us. 50-plus years in this industry. Joseph, I love your book, Living a Life of Significance, and I'm so grateful for the things that you share. Let's talk about purpose-driven retirement. And I know you talk about it in your book, but what does this mean, purpose-driven retirement?
Well, what it means is I began to think as I had been in the business that we began to lose our way, that we really were talking. Well, I had to introduce financial planning. I had no idea what the hell it was. And then I bumped into Nick Murray, and this guy is supposed to be the sage. He's talking about people's behavior. So what the hell is, I thought I'd see charts, graphs, and all of this other stuff. And so he got me on that track, about that. So what I begin to focus on is what I wanted to tell financial advisors is you live a significant life, and you live a significant life because you benefit others. And so I think there's 4 pillars to living a significant life. So this is good for civilians too out there. Okay. The first pillar is 4: belonging, purpose, storytelling, and transcendence and belonging. With the rise of secularization and the decline of religion and family values, people have never felt more isolated alone. Yale did a study and found out the more people use Facebook, the worse they feel. Nobody posts the dog died or the car blew up. It's all this stuff that people don't believe anyway, and it's there. Also, the Surgeon General has said that the people who have a profound sense of isolation is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So, that's a big issue. Purpose, you have to have a life that's committed to something other than just what's in it for you. Storytelling, all wisdom comes from specific human experiences. And we've lost that in financial services. We're always talking about numbers and all the other stuff. And I see Cheryl Moore's back behind you there. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's probably the preeminent expert in indexed annuities. But
Yes.
what she talks about is her life experience and why she feels the way she feels. Now, anyone in financial services will tell you equities outperform all the time, just not every day. And they do. They're outstanding in terms of their performance. And the fact of the matter is some people just can't take the volatility. And some other people, Cheryl included, had life experiences so that's what she wants. She wants to have a situation whereby the product, whereby there aren't severe downs and I'll take some of the upside. I mean, one of the things to look at is the idea of inflation. So I like to use something very simple, a stamp, say, 30 years. A stamp back in 1995 cost 32 cents. Now it costs 73. So it's up 2.5 times. The S&P, however, went from 459. It's now over 6,000. That's like 11 times. But who needs 11 times? I mean, most people would be happy if they were able to maintain their standard of living, because most people fall behind that as inflation just erodes them out. So I think that's important. The other thing, too, which I uncovered, is that married people live longer. Do you know why?
Why is
I have
that?
absolutely no idea why, but it just happens to be a fact. I thought I'd get it from you. But anyway, that's the point. So it's really the idea of people being able to make the right decisions predicated on how they feel and their life experiences.
Joe, that's really good. And I will say, that's true. The stats say that married people live longer. I do know part of the answer to that question, though. Do you know why men die first?
Why?
Because they want to. So there we go. That's part of the story right there. I had to tell a joke today. I will say this. If you're watching right now, I do normally one time mention my book, Bulletproof, The Safe and Secure Retirement Income Plan. I'm a storyteller. You guys know that I was in full-time ministry before this, and so I spent years and years and years. I have a degree in education. I've always been in front of people teaching, sharing, doing things like Joe does, speaking on stage in front of people. But in Bulletproof, I actually do share some pretty powerful stories, my own story. I talk about having a brain tumor at age 27. The pictures are actually in the book, and there's a reason why I share it. And I was telling Joe about this before we started this morning, but if you want a free copy of the book that will talk about how a tumor in your brain is much like having a tumor in your retirement account, and that is a tax tumor. You've got to deal with that tumor at some point. It's going to force its way into your life being dealt with in one way or another. In my life, it's because I had some seizures. And it's like, okay, what's going on here? In your retirement accounts, it's going to be this thing called required minimum distributions and lifelong taxes. Now, Joseph, you were saying before the break, and I wrote this down in my notes. I'm a front rower, whether it's at MDRT, it's an Ed Slot event. When we were in Dallas, I said, I met you and I said, I'll be there on the front row. And I wrote down what you said in our last segment. Isolation is equal to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Loneliness is killing people.
Yes, sir.
So let's start right there. Let's talk about the many risks that retirees are facing in today's world. How can people plan for inflation and the incredible increase in costs and goods and services and all this stuff? What are these risks? Let's talk about them.
Well, one is running out of money, which I just talked about. So one thing to do, which I think is critical, people should delay Social Security as long as possible. You can get it at 62 now. It's 67 now, well, it depends upon, your age or what have you. But right now, like mine was 67. But if you wait to 70, it's 74% more. I mean, why would you not do that? Unless, of course, you have a medical issue or whatever, you can't do it. But most people just do this blindly. So Social Security is there, and it's also had some pretty decent inflationary increases too. The other thing about running out of money is to be sure that you manage it well. So, historically in the equity base, the financial services base, there's the ideal 60-40 portfolio, 60% in equities, 40% in bonds. And the reason that you do that is because they operate, they're not supposed to be congruent. So when one goes up, the other goes down and what have you. But sometimes enough spaghetti hits the fan, like in 2022, and they both go down.
They both went down. Right.
Right. That's right. So that's, again, one of these indexed annuity ideas is maybe that should be the bond portfolio.
Well, when you go back and you were mentioning so many great things are running out of money, market volatility, sequence of returns, risk, the need for a buffer asset. Dr. Wade Pfau and Dr. Michael Finke and even Dr. David Blanchett, they've all been guests on the show, but I know they talked a lot about this 60-40 portfolio and 60% stocks and 40% bonds. They said that's really now stocks and annuities. But the 2022 taught us that the bonds can't be a part of that to the level and degree that they used to be. Now, we're not saying don't ever own them at all, but it should not all be hedged on that bet, because in 2022, stocks went down 20% and bonds went down 30%. So you're in a mess if that's your first year of retirement. I always say, what if you retired on December the 31st of 2021 and the market was booming and things were great, and then you wake up your first day of retirement and your first year, the market goes down and you're all in equities and bonds? Well, good luck. Sequence of returns risk is going to wipe you out. You'll be back at work. Your portfolio is going to be down 30 or 40%, because here are the 4 things that will wipe you out. Number 1, taking withdrawals from your account. We have to take the withdrawals when we retire. We can't stop that. Number 2, what happens if the market goes backwards? So you withdrew the money while the market's going backwards, while you're paying a fee to an advisor to manage it, while you're paying taxes on the distributions coming out of that account. Withdrawals, distributions, fees, taxes will eat your lunch. You better have a plan in place. Like some fixed index annuities and income riders, there is science behind all the things that we do. So, Joe, this is great information. I want to share our number again. If you're listening right now, you've never heard this combination of products and ideas and concepts, just call us. We are retirement income certified professionals. I'm a certified financial fiduciary, and we will show you how to get started down the right path to a successful, peaceful, worry-free retirement. That's 866-780-7233. We'll give you our information free. Just give us a call. There's someone standing by right now to take your call. Okay, Joe, now let's talk about this. We've talked about the risks that are involved in retirement. We've talked about isolation, how we're living longer. Men die first. Women are living 15 to 20 years after that, outnumbering the men 5-1 later into retirement. We're talking about how all these things can impact a successful retirement plan. There's one thing we haven't talked about yet. Well, we talked about it just a little bit, but my good friend, America's IRA expert, Ed Slott, says the number one thing that will separate you from the retirement of your dreams is taxes. Let's talk about it. What's your thought on taxes, Joe?
Well, in our country, it ain't deep. The more money you make, the more you pay in taxes, right? So that's also true in retirement. So a number of steps can be taken to alleviate some of that. If you are in a tax-qualified plan, an IRA or what have you, that money, when you take it out, is taxable. However, now you have the possibility of doing a Roth conversion. And the Roth conversion simply means that you pay the taxes at the current rates, and then it becomes a Roth, which means it goes into never taxed status, and it can come out on a tax-free basis. Now, I don't think a lot of people know this, but everyone talks about what Trump did in this tax reform, for the very, very rich. Do you know that right now, the current tax law, which is in effect to the end of this year, everyone thinks it's going to be extended, but you never know. Do you know that you could have $427,000 out at an effective tax rate of 20% at the federal government level? So, holy smokes, why don't you do it, I mean, what's good about it is you don't have to really be a wealthy guy. Let's say you got $300,000 or $250,000 in an IRA, pay the taxes at 20% now. Now it's forever tax-free because you have a partner. It's called the IRS, and they will come in and they will pull that out. So again, one of the things that could be used for that perhaps could be the high cash value life insurance policy. The other thing, which I didn't get to in the buffer asset thing, is reverse mortgages.
Absolutely.
I got to tell you, I raised a crucifix and garlic every time I heard, you know, but they've really changed. And there's something like $12 trillion, ridiculous amount of people who have home ownership, over 65 years of age. They've really cleaned it up. You could access this money on a tax-free basis. And what that could do is pay the taxes on your IRA or qualified plan, even beyond the $427,000. But that's what a lot of people don't know. So why the hell wouldn't you do that? And I think that's important. The other thing that people could do is, especially with the older couple, there might be the possibility of going out and buying a second to die policy. When you have a second to die, it's usually husband and wife, and they both have to
Yes.
die, so it extends
Yeah.
it out. So it helps to mitigate the mortality risk, right? Because older people tend not to be under it, But anyway, someone could pull out 100,000, have 85,000 net, pay that on a monthly basis into a second to die policy, to make that happen. To mitigate the taxes that the children would inherit. What happens is there's something called IRMA, and I forget what it stands for, but what it does is depending upon how much money you make, you get this other tax hit, that's how they pay for Medicare. And
Yes.
it's means tested. So depending upon how much income you have, they're going to take more to pay Medicare. So what happens is if you can lower your taxable income, okay, you hear me? You can lower your
Yes.
taxable income, then that means they take less out of Social Security. It's not like the Joe Namath stuff. That Joe Namath stuff is you got to live in a box, okay, on
Yeah.
the street to be able to get that. But what we're talking about is that. So those are some of the tax issues that people can use right now.
Very good. Income related monthly adjustment amounts. We
That's
did
right.
a video on this a few weeks ago. 400,000 people viewed it in 2 weeks. We just are about to release part two. You can go to YouTube and type in the letter that you do not want to get from Medicare. But I will say this, Joe has just shared some brilliant information with you, and hopefully I can show you a little bit of my genius. And I stole this genius from other people years ago. People have heard me say, we've talked about in both my books, that I own 10 life insurance policies. Well, now I own 9 because one of them I owned on my father and he passed away. But one of those policies is a second to die policy on my parents. Now, I actually am the owner, the payer, and the beneficiary of that account. Why did I do that? Am I trying to get wealthy off my parents passing? No, I'm not. I'll tell you what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to be smart. I'm trying to be wise. I'm trying to be a good steward. This is my philosophy in life. God gave us all a brain, and he expects us to use it. My father was a CLU, a chartered life underwriter. He sold life insurance for Blue Cross Blue Shield for 28 years. He was an advisor for Merrill Lynch. And guess what he did not do? He did not take out a life insurance policy on his parents, and he didn't own one on himself. So later in life, I'm like, Dad, you're teaching this to people all over the place. Why would you not take the benefit of the tax code to benefit yourself and your family? Well, I just feel guilty about that. You feel guilty about leaving tax-free money to your family instead of giving it to Uncle Sam when you die? You shouldn't feel guilty about it. Late in life, when my dad was in his 60s, he stopped using tobacco so he could get non-tobacco rates. It had to do that for 2 years. He bought life insurance policies on himself and on my mother. He took a life insurance exam so that I could take out a second to die policy on both of them. And I took out traditional policies on them. Why? Because of the long-term care benefits inside the policies. They didn't have traditional long-term care if anything ever happened to either one of them. Because I'm paying for a policy for them that has their benefit, I can reach in and take that out tax-free and use that for their care. And so for pennies on the dollar, I took out a second to die policy, and that's going to be something that brings tax-free wealth into our family. I own it, I'm the payer on it, and I'm the beneficiary. Use the tax code to your advantage. Well, friends, if you're just joining us, we're going to wrap up this last segment, but I will tell you this. You need to go to YouTube and watch this video. We're here with Joseph Jordan today, the author of Living a Life of Significance. And Joe, where can people go get a copy of your book?
I can get it from my website. It's josephjordan.com. It's pretty much out there, and I have a lot of other items and things that people can find useful. And I'd also, if there's people out there want someone to speak, I speak at a different level. It's kind of more along the lines of the broader perspective that's there. I do use a lot of storytelling, which is important, I think. I talk about the idea of purpose-driven retirement planning, going beyond just the numbers It's the idea of helping people what they're going to do. I forget the think tank, but one of them came out and thinks our whole business 10 years from now will be more participating in this type of approach to make certain that we find out from people what they want to do. I mean, you liked one of the questions I asked is, we go to civilians and we ask them, what do you want? What's your financial goals? They don't know what the hell their financial goals are. But there's one great one. It's like, in life, do you want to have a guarantee that you'll never be poor, or do you really want to be rich? And most people just want to make certain that they can maintain their standard of living. And I think that gets the wheels rolling. So on top of it, what I think will happen in our business is this type of approach of purpose-driven retirement planning will put what people want to do in their life first and the money second, as it should be, as it's
Yes.
not now. And I really feel bad for the young people because they don't know how to talk to people or tell stories because they're doing this all of the time,
Yeah.
So I'm really excited about the future. I think we are going to be dealing with the major issue the planet faces, which is the aging population of the world and the decrease in terms of children. We need more babies in this world, and that's not going to reverse soon. So I'm very optimistic about our profession going forward.
Friends, you're listening to a powerful person who's got 50 plus years in this industry. I know he's given hundreds of presentations to more than 400,000 financial professionals in more than 28 countries. I know he gave the opening keynote speech at the $1 Million Roundtable, top of the table. He's one of the best. And so I'll say this. He was talking earlier, and I took notes from the conference that we both spoke at in Dallas, and I wrote down, do you want to be rich, or do you want a lifetime guarantee that you will never be poor? And that reminded me of Tom Hegna, how he always says people don't live on assets. They live on income streams. No one retires and goes, oh, I've got $500,000 in my 401k. Let me just sit here and stare at this all day. Because then you wake up and guess what? 500 becomes 450, and then it becomes 400, and then it might jump back up to 460, and then it's down to 350. And what happens to your emotions? Up, down, up, down. They don't live on the pot of money. They live on an income stream. So if you ask someone, you want to stare at this number, this magic number, or do you want a guaranteed paycheck of a certain amount coming in every single month, no matter what? You never have to look at the number. You're just going to have an inbox of money coming in every month, guaranteed for the rest of your life. Which one do you want? People are going to choose the pension. They want the guaranteed money, and that only is going to come from a combination of Social Security, pensions, and self-made pensions, which is annuities with income riders. And that's why our good friend Cheryl Moore, Joe, and I both talk about why she owns fixed index annuities. I own 8 different fixed index annuities. Why? No one's giving me a pension when I retire. I'm going to have to create it myself, and I'm not going to rely on Social Security. I'm going to create it by taking my assets, purchasing annuities with income riders, and I'm going to have that mailbox money coming in every single month, no matter what. So, friends, I'm so grateful for people like Joseph Jordan, who take his time and his expertise and his years of experience to come share with people like you and me to say, hey, we've been there, we've done this, we know the math, we know the science, this is what works. And so we're grateful for him sharing this stuff. So I'll steal this from him. I wrote this down during his talk. The more people use Facebook, the more miserable they feel. Friends, get off Facebook. Shut your phones down. Get off Instagram. I'm not on Facebook. You won't find me on there. I'm not on Instagram. Look people in the eye. Go to dinner with them. Sit down and talk. Share your life. Share your stories. Have interaction with people. Find purpose in your life. Joe will teach you how to live a life of significance. Joe, one more time, where can they get this book on your website? What is it?
It's josephjordan.com, and you just get it.
It's so fantastic, and I was able to get it whenever I was at the conference, and I got some other special things that Joe does, and so I'm grateful for that. You need to go there. It's a wealth of information. Friends, if you want a copy of my best-selling book, Bulletproof, The Safe and Secure Retirement Income Plan, just call us. I'll give it to you free. I'll give you a free financial consultation. And I will say this, from all my years of $1 Million Roundtable, MDRT, top of the table, here's the key. You become like the 5 people you spend the most time with. I'm so blessed to get to know people like Joseph Jordan, who shared with you today, to have him in my inner circle, people that I listen to, that I read. I've watched all of his videos. What a wealth of knowledge, Joe. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Everyone, listen, have a great day. Call us anytime, 866-780-7233. Have a fantastic week. and God bless.